We turn now to the war in Ukraine, today entering its second year of fighting. Ukrainian forces desperate to hold on to territory in the east around the decimated city of Bakhmut. But it's coming at a high cost to civilians and soldiers on both sides. All of this as the U.S. and its allies ramp up the pressure on Vladimir Putin with a new round of sanctions. ABC's Patrick Reevell from Ukraine tonight.
Tonight, with the Ukraine war now in its second year, the US and other Western countries announcing fresh sanctions against Moscow, targeting 200 individuals and companies from Russia and third countries, including a dozen financial institutions.
John, good morning.
National Security Council spokesman John Kirby on Good Morning America this morning.
A lot of the 200 entities that we sanctioned yesterday are in his defense sector, so we think they'll definitely have an impact.
Ukrainian forces tonight are in a desperate battle to hold the eastern city of Bakhmut. Ukraine's top ground forces commander in the city to help personally direct the defense. These men are headed to Bakhmut, part of a unit of Chechen volunteers. Chechnya was devastated by Russian troops in the 90s and early 2000s. Now dozens of Chechens are fighting for Ukraine, filming themselves in combat videos like this.
Why are you fighting in this war? What is happening in Ukraine now? It's the same thing that happened to Chechnya. And all this occupation, all this massive graves, all this genocide of civilians.
President Zelensky on the anniversary saying he hopes Ukraine can win the war this year, but only if Western aid continues.
Mr. President.
David Muir asking President Biden Friday about Ukraine's demand for more weapons.
We know President Zelensky continues to say what he really needs are F-16s. Will you send F-16s?
Look, we're sending him what our seasoned military thinks he needs now. He needs tanks, he needs artillery, he needs air defense, including another HIMARS. There's things he needs now.
You don't think he needs F-16s now?
No, he doesn't need F-16s now.
The US Friday pledging $2 billion more in military aid. ABC's Ian Pannell asking Zelensky Friday about recent polling suggesting that American support for backing Ukraine may be softening.
Mr. President, opinion polls in the United States are suggesting that a growing number of Americans believe that the US is giving too much support to Ukraine. What would your message be on the anniversary to those Americans?
Zelensky in response thanking the American people, but adding that if Americans do not support Ukraine, they will lose NATO and their leadership position in the world.
Patrick Reevell joining us now from Kyiv. And Patrick, as the world notes the one-year anniversary of this war in Ukraine, you're learning more about the human toll.
Yeah, the UN says that 13 million Ukrainians right now are displaced, and of those, 8 million are currently refugees in Europe. I mean, it's much harder to calculate casualties, but Western officials believe around 200,000 Russian troops have been killed or injured. At least 100,000 Ukrainian troops are believed also to have been killed or injured. And the fighting right now is the bloodiest it's ever been. Whit?
Just an incredible amount of loss in just 1 year. Patrick, thank you. And in that one-on-one interview, our David Muir also pressing Biden on the possibility of China assisting Russia.
I know the State Department and the Pentagon now have both warned China not to offer lethal military assistance to Russia in this war with Ukraine, saying the U.S. is concerned that China is considering providing lethal support to Russia. Would that cross a line for you?
I had a very frank conversation with President Xi this past summer. I said, Mr. President, this is not a threat, it's just an assertion, a statement of what I think the reality is. You saw what happened when the rest of the world, Europe in particular, saw the brutality of what Putin was doing in Ukraine. And I said, without any government prodding, 600 American corporations left Russia, from McDonald's to Exxon to across the board. And I said, and if you are engaged in the same kind of brutality by supporting the brutality that's going on, I said, you may face the same consequence.
Let's bring in Elizabeth Schulze now at the White House. Elizabeth, just how worried is the Biden administration about China providing some support to Russia in Ukraine?
This is what the start of the war looked like. Air raid sirens and explosions on day one as Russian rockets rained down. This is where things stood back then with Russian-controlled areas in red. And here's how they look now. Russia grabbed more territory, but Ukraine has also taken some back. On this solemn anniversary, our coverage begins in Kyiv with CTV's chief international correspondent,
To the sound of a solitary drum beat, Ukraine marked a year of sacrifice, but also its survival. A minute of silence in the grand courtyard of St. Sophia Cathedral. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky declaring his nation and army invincible on the way to victory over their Russian invaders.
Я хочу сказати усім вам, усім.
To all who fight for Ukraine, I want to say I'm proud of you. Let this pride be felt in the streets and in the trenches, he said. Long live Ukraine. Awarding the country's highest honor to the families of fallen soldiers. Quietly telling each one, we will never forget. The whole country will never forget. A memorial garden of flags on a somber anniversary, a day of grief, mixed with flashbacks of the horror Ukraine has endured. Since the morning, I've been feeling very anxious, she says. I'm crying a little. I buried my son, who died fighting. I also buried my husband. Now I'm on my own, and it's very hard. Help arrived today with the first shipment of Leopard tanks from Poland, with many more to follow from other Western countries. As Ukraine's military power grows, and with it, the prospect of battlefield advances. We brought you the first 4 Leopard tanks, said the Polish Prime Minister, to chase away the Russian aggressor as soon as possible. Ukraine's sorrow is deeply agonizing everywhere, but especially so in the city of Bucha, where Russian soldiers tortured and massacred civilians and left their bodies in the streets. Remembered on this day with graveside tears and loss that feels cruel and unbearable. It's been a year of pain, resilience, and hope, said the Ukrainian president. And if allies remain united like a fist, he said, then Ukraine can win this war. John.
Paul Workman leading us off. Thank you. The U.S. is a close ally to Ukraine, but tonight Joe Biden says he will not be sending fighter jets. Biden made the comments in an interview with ABC News.
There's things he needs now that we're sending him to put him in a position to be able to make gains this spring and this summer going into the fall.
You don't think he needs F-16s now?
No, he doesn't need F-16s now.
While the Prime Minister announced new military support.
We will deliver 4 additional Leopard 2 tanks to the armed forces of Ukraine and an armored recovery vehicle.
That adds up to 8 tanks in total from Canada, along with 5,000 rounds of ammunition. 1 year ago, the scenes at Ukraine's border crossings were filled with panic and chaos. And today, while not quite as busy, there are still refugees longing to return home and soldiers heading back to the front lines, some of them speaking with our Vanessa Lee in Poland.
Armed with training and expertise from allies, including Canada, Ukrainian soldiers get set to cross the border to defend their country at all costs. We will beat Putin, he says. As they make their way toward danger, others are rushing out. It took Tatiana Chaus and her son 22 hours by train from Kharkiv, a city under attack from the start of the war. We woke up to the sound of explosions, planes and bombs, and we hid in the basement for a month. I remember it like it was today, she says. Like at least 8 million others, they ended up fleeing. But after months in Poland, they decided to return home last week in hopes of staying for good. That dream was short-lived. It was too dangerous. Not everyone has the choice to escape. Most Ukrainian men aged 18 to 60 are banned from leaving, including Zoriana Misji's husband, Roman. He was home celebrating his grandmother's birthday when his car broke down just as the war began. He has not been able to return to Warsaw, where together they run this cafe that is close to their hearts. It is difficult for me as his wife and business partner, she says. Some have decided they've been separated long enough. Elena Kuzmenko and her children are heading home to Dnipro, even though it has been the target of missile strikes.
Are you scared?
No. I just believe that it's our fate. If we will survive, we will survive.
Here in Poland, the government says more than 900,000 Ukrainians have found work. That's 84% of refugees who are in the job market, now entering a second year in their adopted country. John.
All right, Vanessa, thanks so much. Many Ukrainians fleeing the war have also made their way to Canada, and hundreds of thousands hope to do the same. But there are concerns tonight about a special government program aimed at helping such refugees that's set to end in just over a month. With more on that, here's CTV's Manitoba Bureau Chief, Jill Makashon.
For the Fedorova family, home was once Kyiv and Mariupol before the bombs dropped. Now it's an apartment in Winnipeg.
And we're worried about family, we're worried about friends, we're worried about all of them.
Their father forced to stay behind. It's their mother, Olga, who is working here. Once an interior designer in Ukraine, she's found her place in an architectural firm in the city. And the girls are finishing a university degree, their dream one day to become doctors.
Somewhere in the world you can go and they will support you and will help you to assimilate.
Canada is not only starting to feel like home, one day it might be home. This family is applying for permanent residency.
My hometown destroyed in total.
The Fedorovas are a small piece of this new diaspora. 1 year since the war began, and Canada has welcomed nearly 170,000 displaced Ukrainians, but there are many more waiting. More than 860,000 temporary resident applications have been received by the federal government through the Canada-Ukraine Authorization for Emergency Travel, or QIT. Most of those have been approved, but today roughly 300,000 applications are pending, and the existing program is set to expire next month.
The numbers are quite large, obviously, as you've seen, and so we think it would be not a great decision to end a refugee program, while the war is still on.
From the Office of the Immigration Minister, we continue to closely monitor the ongoing needs of Ukrainians and will adapt our response as needed. A war now dragging into a second year. The Fedorovas know many more people like them who are looking to this nation for support and safety and maybe one day a new home.
We will live in Canada. I hope so.
Displaced Ukrainians can stay in Canada for up to 3 years, but there's no clear picture on what the refugee program will look like for those still attempting to come after March 31st. John.
Okay, Jill in Winnipeg tonight. Thank you.
Despite President Biden's current stance of ruling out the possibility of sending F-16 fighter jets, Western support for Ukraine remains strong as the country enters its second year of war with Russia. For more on this, we're joined live on the KCBS Ring Central Newsline by Don Jensen. He's director of Russia and Europe at the U.S. Institute of Peace and a former diplomat at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. Thanks so much for your time this morning.
Well, good morning.
So we have heard a lot about Western aid going to Ukraine. What do you expect to arrive next?
Well, a couple things are going to happen. First of all, as you've seen, the Ukrainians need a lot of things that are not glamorous. Spare parts, training, ammunition, and a lot of those systems that are very sophisticated that we and our allies have given them need all those things in order to function effectively. Because what the Ukrainians now have is technology and morale against Russia's sort of primitive brute force, and that's sort of the struggle going on in the battlefield. However, as of now at least, as you mentioned, F-16s are not going to be part of the package. Some other weapon systems are not going to be part of that assistance. Why? It's not that the U.S. doesn't 1,000% support Ukraine. It's that there is still concern in the White House, understandably, about doing things that the Kremlin might seem as too provocative, where they might react and use nuclear weapons tactically or something like that. So there have always been red lines from the beginning, but the red lines have shifted. So right now there are going to be no F-16s, and in general, however you define offensive, no, quote, offensive weapons, that would allow Ukraine to hit Russia inside the country. And that's where it stands now. But as I said, it has shifted, as we've all seen over the past months, so we'll have to see.
We're hearing more and more about China and how China could be changing its stance of not providing weapons to Russia, but may soon be providing ammunition and other armaments. What do you think China could provide, and how would that change the equation on the battlefield?
Well, a good question. What you've seen this week, above all, more than in 12 months, is the emergence of China as an overt, visible player. You saw their peace plan this week, 12 points. It's objectionable in a lot of ways, but that's a very strong change in the Chinese attitude. As Secretary Blinken said, they appear to have discussed giving weaponry to Russia, but they have not done so yet. But they do provide workarounds for the sanctions. They provide diplomatic support. But the Chinese are trying to walk a very thin line between supporting or give moral support or tilting toward their Russian partners, but not going too far. I think privately, my sense is from talking to Chinese diplomats, and I did this week, they think Putin is too destructive, that everything shouldn't be smashed the way he is doing it, and on the long term, that's going to hurt Russia. I think if you ask them privately, that's what they would say. That does not mean they want to cuddle up to the U.S. or Europe. That does not mean they don't feel NATO is a threat and that Russia has a grievance. So they're trying to walk this thin line. And frankly, I've had a lot of discussions with think tank people in particular, and it's very hard sometimes for me to follow the line because it's a very big gray area. But they have shifted this week, and I think that the peace plan, unacceptable as it is, probably augurs for a broader Chinese involvement across the board in the coming months.
And let's make a prediction for, I don't want to say another year. I mean, everyone hopes that this war will be ended sooner rather than later. But what do you think will happen in the coming months and, God forbid, another year of fighting?
Well, that's what everybody talks about. I'll give you my personal opinion, which is that Ukraine will continue to defend itself, to build its resistance, to move toward the West. However, it does not have combat power yet to push the Russians out. And I think that seems to me to indicate either eventual negotiations, not that I favor that, but we seem to be going in that direction, or a North Korea kind of situation where both sides are antagonistic to the other, but there's no formal peace treaty. We may be going in that direction. However, there are overt signs of tension in the Russian leadership. For the first time really in months, in the last month or so, about Wagner, fighting between the military, defense ministry and the Wagner mercenary groups. That doesn't mean there's a peace party out there in Moscow. In fact, Russia's going to probably be more repressive in the coming year. But Russia is, again, punching below its weight, and that helps the Ukrainians. And in the end, that might mean that they prevail.